The Carpenter and the Cradle, a History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 37. It was taking longer than he'd like for a bird or squirrel to happen upon the food he'd set in the hole under the trap. Hiding behind a bush, Ko knew he shouldn't let his attention wander, or he might miss the moment he needed to pull the cord to drop the stick supporting the flat rock that would fall over the hole and capture their next meal. But his attention was wandering anyway. His head was stuffed full of what he had just heard from Hab and Yosa. But he didn't want to think about it. To pass the time, Ko idly scribbled the 8 sacred symbols in the dirt with a sharp stick. In spite of Ko's sharp ears, he barely had time to turn his head at the sound of a light rustle before Yosa was beside him. Yosa was a master of the quiet walk. Yosa sank onto the ground beside him. "You've learned the sacred symbols," he observed, looking at Ko's sketches. Ko lifted one shoulder. "I know how to draw them. I know the sacred pieces where they're carved," he said. "Yes, the sacred pieces that came from my village." "They haven't always been in our council chambers?" "No, they were captured in a raid, the same raid when you were taken as a baby." Ko didn't want to think about that. He still wasn't sure what to believe. "Why haven't you taken them back if they're so important?" Ko asked finally. "Their role was for passing on the knowledge of the great mysteries to the next generation when they're admitted to the council when they've lived 15 years. It was the knowledge that was important. The sacred pieces were a visible reminder of that knowledge, as was the symbols on them. They are nothing without the knowledge. We still pass on the knowledge to the next generation through the great questions and the symbols. Do you know what the symbols mean?" "No," Ko said shortly. There was nothing else to say. The truth that Yosa was speaking to him was coming home to him. Why did Ko's people have the sacred pieces with their sacred symbols and not know what they meant? It was looking more and more likely to him that Yosa had been telling him the truth. The sacred pieces didn't belong to Ko's village after all, because the knowledge didn't belong to them. They had stolen the sacred pieces and left the knowledge behind. But the power was in the knowledge, not in the pieces themselves. "Would you like to?" Ko looked at Yosa. He tried to keep a gleam of interest out of his eyes. He'd like nothing more, but he didn't want to tell Yosa that. He tried to gauge the expression on Yosa's face. Would agreeing to learn the meanings of the symbols require that Ko accept Yosa's friendship? He wasn't sure he was ready for that. "I'd like to," Ko said slowly, curiosity overruling any caution. "There are 8 great questions with their answers that are the meaning of the sacred pieces and their symbols. These great questions open up the great mysteries. But the mysteries are still a great mystery, make no mistake about that. First, I'll tell you the great questions and their answers behind each of the sacred pieces and their symbols, and next time we meet, I'll tell you the great story behind the sacred pieces and their symbols." So, Yosa planned that there would be a next time. Ko wasn't so sure. But there was this time. "Okay, I'm ready." Ko, seated on the ground in the cross-legged position, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He was in the usual posture for storytelling and hearing. "Open your eyes and look around, Dove." Ko flinched a little at the unfamiliar name, but said nothing. He obeyed and saw the stretch of the lower mountains below them on the other side of the valley beyond the river, and the deep forest, and, beyond those mountains, spread after spread of distant blue ranges. He looked up and saw wisps of white clouds, made brilliant by the sun, too bright for the human eye. "The first symbol is drawn on the tent of meeting." "Is that what you call it? We call ours the council chambers," Ko interrupted. Then he hung his head, waiting for Yosa to chastise him for his rudeness. But Yosa only said, "Yes, the tent of meeting, that's what we call it. That tent is a symbol, too. It represents everything you see, because the land is our home, like a tent that your people and my people make their home. The land is like a much bigger tent. The first great question that goes with the symbol and the tent of meeting is, why is there everything instead of nothing? Ko didn't have an answer, so he kept silent. Do you know the answer, Dove? No, Ko said. Yosa continued. The answer is listen, and you will hear. Is that what I'm supposed to say when you ask the first question? Yes. Ko repeated the words, and then he obeyed his own instructions to himself, and listened to hear the next question that went with the next symbol. Look again, Dove. Did you make all that you see? In spite of the solemnity of the occasion, a laugh escaped Ko. No, he said, still smiling, unsure if Yosa was serious. He sounded serious, but the answer was obvious. What was he getting at? That's what the second question asks and answers, the question that goes with the first seat, this symbol here. Yosa pointed to the second symbol. Who made everything? I don't know, Ko answered expectantly. He was eager to hear Yosa's answer. Ko knew what he'd been told as a child, but it was a story for children, and even if true, it didn't exactly explain anything at all, not really. Yosa believed something or someone had made everything? Ko couldn't wait to hear the answer. The correct answer, Dove, is simply, not I. Then the other sacred pieces teach us about the nameless one, the invisible one who made everything, the maker. You just need to start by knowing that you are not the maker. For make and maker, Yosa used the words in Ko's language that would be the modern equivalent of build and carpenter. Building and carving out of wood, like the sturgeon-nosed bark and willow canoes Ko's people made, was the form of making that Ko's people thought of as making. On first hearing, the words didn't immediately bridge to the kind of making that would have made the trees themselves from which the canoes were made, or the river on which they traveled, or the mountains and the rocks and the sky above and everything Ko was seeing. But he quickly grasped the meaning of Yosa's use of the word. Ko interjected, Why does that question go with the first seat, and what does the symbol for it mean? Those are thoughtful questions. Well done, Dove. You're learning to ask, not just accept whatever you're told. The first seat is the maker's seat. Would you agree that the one who makes is the one who rules what he makes? So the first seat belongs to the one who rules. He rules in the great tent of meeting. I mean, everything that you see, he rules. Limo uses the first seat as the judgment seat in the council chambers. And so it is. But judgment doesn't belong to Limo. Not finally. The only answer Limo could make to the question, who made everything, is, not I. The seat belongs to whoever was first, really first. The one who made everything else. As you have the right to decide what you do with what you make, so does the one who made everything. Ko turned the concept over in silence. He remembered when he was very young asking Limo questions about where everything had come from. He'd learned about the time before his people, when it was just the animals who lived on the land. From his youngest memories, he'd heard the story of the monstrous sturgeon who had created the river with his nose by fleeing from his lake home, being pursued by a hunting party. He knew about the giant bear who had forgotten he was too tall to stand up, had stood up on 2 legs, hit his head on the sky, and crashed to earth. The mountain on which they now sat was the body of the great bear, where he had landed to rise no more. But Ko had wanted to know more. Where had the animals come from? Where did the sturgeon and the great bear come from in the first place? Impatient with his questions, Limo told him that everything had life in it, and life came on its own, just as Ko had come. You don't remember anything about your being before you were Ko, do you? Limo had asked him. That's because you weren't anything before you were Ko. Do you remember your coming? No, but you just came to be. One day, that's how life comes to be, it just comes. But that was before Ko knew where his life had come from. Since he had learned about men and women coming together, and life coming from that coming together, he now knew that Limo hadn't quite told him the truth when he was very little. In fact, Ko could see that life came from life. So it was with the animals, too, since the childhood explanation Limo had given him for the being of everything. Ko had somewhere along the way stopped wondering. Now that childish wondering returned. After all, life came from other life, and things that were made came from their makers. If everything else hadn't always just been, then it must have been made or come from life, or both. If it had been made, it had also come from life, as all makers are alive. What else could Yosa tell him about the great mysteries and the great questions that opened them up? And the symbol on the first seat? Ko asked again. This part here, that's the symbol of the great tent of meeting, the great tent of everything. And this part is the first seat. The first seat fills the sky above us and the ground below us. We can't see him, just as you can't see your thoughts inside of you, but the maker of everything rules from the first seat, which is everywhere. Ah, Ko understood now what the symbol meant. It was the first seat filling the great tent of everything. He waited for the explanation of the next sacred piece. The next piece is the table of giving. We call it the table of ceremony. It was originally called the table of giving. What does it mean? The question that goes with the table of giving is, what do you need and how are your needs met? Ko gave his own answers. I need food and water and the sky and the dirt beneath me to grow things and the mountains and the river and the forest to live on and with them. These are good answers, Dove. I see why the symbol is a table, because we put our bread and the meat on it, what we need. I see why that question goes with it. Yes, Dove. Here's the answer I was taught. What I need is what is given, and what is given is what I need. Ko pondered. If everything didn't come to be all on its own, if everything had been made and was like the things his people made, except by one much bigger and not to be seen with the eye, then he could see that all the things he needed must have been made. His mind opened wider. Then they had been given to meet the needs of the people and the animals, all the living things. The great questions really did have a way of opening the thinking up to the great mysteries, mysteries that Ko had never bothered to wonder about before. Why was everything the way it was? How strange that he and his people and all living things had so many needs. And there were those needs met all around them by what had been made, just for the taking. Strange, unless they had been given by the maker of them. Ko didn't need to ask about the third symbol, the one carved on the table. It now seemed self-explanatory. What's next? Ko asked eagerly. Yosa had been allowing Ko time to think, but Ko wanted to know more. Next is the lamp holder. Yosa pointed at the fourth symbol, the one that was carved on the lamp holder. And what is its question? Ko was already thinking about the great fire up above their heads, and the moon at night, and the tiny pricks of light that were the stars. Did the lamp holder represent these lights? Their light was all so beautiful, and the means of seeing the rest of the beauty around them. If everything was made, were these also made? His people worshipped them as sacred, as living forever. It was hard to think of them as once having been made, too. He listened intently. What do you want? What do you enjoy? What do you love? Whatever Ko had expected about the great questions connected to the lamp holder, he hadn't expected these ones. In fact, these were not questions his people thought about much. They thought more in terms of the last question, their needs. Their lives consisted of doing what they were told they must, just carrying on, just living. But yet, Ko had known more. He knew desire. He knew longing, even if he had no proper words for it. He felt it now looking out across the vastness of the mountains and all that they contained. It was the longing of beauty that Ko felt. Beautiful wasn't a word that his people used to describe the land they lived on. It was a word for the things they made, that his people made, or for a man or woman or child, graceful and well-formed. But if these were beautiful, How much more beautiful was what surrounded them that none of them had made. In a faraway sort of idea, Ko understood why want and enjoy and love were connected to the lamp holder, and he understood the symbol of it. It was about beauty, like the lights in the sky. Ko answered in a whisper as he looked past Yosa out to the sights he loved. Beauty, was his answer. Yosa beamed at him. Exactly the answer, he said. Ko was seeing great mysteries in everything for the first time, but some deep part of him had always known them, and had already asked the questions Yosa was teaching him. The answers fit those questions he'd already known, as answers he'd already known as well. He just hadn't had words for them. Next is the wall, Yosa said after a long thinking pause. The wall, Ko said. I know the symbol on it. It looks like fish and birds. I don't know what a wall has to do with fish and birds, Ko admitted. The question to go with the wall is why are things many instead of one? Ko puzzled over the question. Because the word for things that Yosa used meant everything, Ko understood that Yosa was talking about all the everything they had already been talking about. Why was the symbol that went with the question a picture of birds and fish, however? Like, why are fish not birds and birds not fish? Why are fish and birds different? Like, how one lives in water and the other in the sky? Right, Dove, different from each other and different from us. And why is every single thing different from every other single thing? Why are we all separate? Why are there many instead of one? Ko didn't understand the question, but he didn't even know how to ask for an explanation. Because it just is, I suppose, because that's how it was made to be, he said finally. That's not a bad answer, Yosa said, grinning. The answer we learn is the Maker makes them from himself, but not as himself. Ko shrugged. The question and the answer didn't really fit inside him the way the others had. This wasn't a great mystery that had somewhere always pressed on his wondering without his even realizing it. But as he thought on the answer, he decided, I suppose it's asking why anything was made at all. Why is there anything besides the Maker? I suppose that is the great mystery. As we desire beauty, and that's why we make beautiful things. Is that why the Maker made beautiful things? Is that what the question means? I suppose it may also mean that these things are not their own maker, like Lameau told me, that everything just comes. Nothing makes itself like that, not really. Everything comes from something else. So where did the Maker come from? I suppose Yosa would tell me that the Maker is the only thing that didn't have to be made, that he's always been. He was first. These thoughts flew through Ko's mind in quick succession. So quickly he was barely aware of them. His wondering instead fastened on one question that came along at the end of the chain. Why is that a question to go with the wall? Ko asked, and then quickly answered. Oh, never mind. The separation, I get it. Like birds and fish are separated by water and sky, kind of like a wall. We are not one. We are separate from each other, and from the fish and the birds and from the Maker. Yosa smiled agreement. Are you ready for the next piece? It's the sage holder. The symbol on it is a man and woman joined at the hands and feet. Yosa pointed at the symbol Ko had sketched in the dirt, and Ko frowned. He'd seen the symbol on the sage holder, but had never thought of the lines on it as a man and a woman. Now that he studied it, he could see what Yosa meant. The sage is burned to honor the Maker as a perfume to him. The question to go with the sage holder is, why did the Maker make people? Ko nodded. That was certainly an interesting question. He didn't respond to Yosa, but only looked intently at his face, waiting to hear the answer. Why would the Maker make his people? And the other people, and all people? What was the point? Dove, why do fathers want to have children? Ko thought. His father wanted someone to pass on the leadership to. He wouldn't live forever. He wanted something of him to remain when his breath left his body. Ko struggled to put the answer into words. Yosa asked another question. Do fathers love their children? Ko shrugged lightly. Did Limo love him? He wasn't sure. Limo wanted something for him and from him. Was that love? Ko thought of how he had once, and really still, thought of Hab, and how Hab had thought of him. He knew that fathers often had that feeling for their children. He could picture the delight on the face of fathers he knew when their sons had done something to make them proud. Had he ever really seen that look on Limo's face for him? Had he ever even seen Limo smile? He couldn't remember. Yes, some fathers, sometimes, he answered slowly. Good fathers always love their children, Yosa answered. Ko wasn't understanding at all what Yosa was telling him, or certainly not what fathers loving their children had to do with the sage holder, nor what the sage holder had to do with the symbol on it, or the question that went with it. Do you remember when you first burned the sage to honor your father, to honor Limo, I mean? Ko cast his mind back and remembered the moment. The warm, enticing smell filled his memory with the pleasure of it. Was your father pleased? Now that he thought about it, perhaps that was the only time Ko could remember seeing that look of pleasure and pride towards Ko on Limo's face. Yes, Limo had smiled then. Ko slowly indicated that Limo had been pleased. Yosa finished. The answer to the question, why did the Maker make people, is to be his sons and daughters. This was very new information. Thinking of the first time he burned the sage to honor his father, Ko could understand the connection between the sage holder and the question and answer. But it was hard to imagine an invisible maker of everything wanting him, Ko, or anyone else, as a son or daughter. But yet, what other explanation was there? If the Maker wanted to make, to bring about beauty, then surely men and women must have been made to be part of that beauty. Maybe it was for the reason of that pleasure other fathers experienced in their children. It was a very new idea for Ko. Could he be a son? To the Maker, in that way? And now, the water stone, Yosa said. That's for washing, Ko said quickly. That was easy. Hands had to be clean before they could handle the sacred pieces. But what great question would be connected to the water stone, he wondered. Correct. And the question of the water stone is, what is the Maker making you to be? Ko motioned that Yosa should tell him the answer. He couldn't guess it. As far as Ko knew, he was already made. What washing one's hands in the water stone had to do with the Maker making him, Ko had not one idea. The answer is clean. Ko was puzzled. He tried to think what the question and answer could possibly mean. He understood the purpose of the water stone, as far as making one's hands clean for handling the sacred pieces. Without that washing, smudges and dirt would be left on the sacred pieces. But Ko didn't see why the Maker would make him just so he would be clean. Do you understand, Dove? No, not at all, Ko admitted. This question is about why you have life at all. Do you think you always live your purpose, the purpose for which the Maker made you? You mean to be a son or daughter to the Maker? No, I wouldn't know how to live that. I didn't know anything about him until you started telling me about him just now. Yosa acknowledged Ko's statement with a motion of his head. What about honoring your own father and the others of your people? Do you honor all people? Do you always do what you should that way? Suddenly, Ko felt as though he had touched a live coal, but only in his mind. There was a searing sensation in his thoughts. He was sitting and talking face to face with one who knew the answer to that question. Yosa had done Ko no harm. He had even rescued him, and Ko had repaid him with betrayal that could have led to his death. He had even joined in the unreasoning hatred of the others. He had wished death upon the stranger. Ko immediately began talking to himself to comfort himself. But that was before I knew anything about Yosa, he told himself. I couldn't be expected to know. It really did seem like he was one of the enemy. I thought he'd betrayed me first. Then another little answering voice. But did we really stop to find out anything about Yosa? Did he get a fair hearing? Was he allowed to speak for himself? I was proud to think how different we were from the enemy's people, in that we were so much more civilized in dealing with a traitor, but were we? We had more ceremony about it, but it wasn't any better than the way the enemy treated me. And I was a part of what my council did. I was a full council member that night. The argument continued. But if I'd spoken up, no one would have listened to me anyway. There was nothing I really could have done as the youngest council member. And the other voice answered, So you didn't even try? Isn't that cowardice, the worst of all vices? Ko had no inward response to that. He only hung his head. Yosa didn't press the subject, but Ko was sure he knew what the voices had been arguing about inside of him. Yosa just asked, Do you see how the water stone is needed? Ko indicated his agreement. Yes, he saw that he needed cleansing, not just his hands, but like those hands, covered in dirt as they were as he looked down at them, something on the inside wasn't right with him. No, he did not always live his purpose. There were parts of him that were unlike the beauty he could see all around him. He understood why he needed to be clean now. There were smudges and grime in him. Even knowing nothing about the Maker, until Yosa told him, didn't excuse Ko for the unbeauty that he could now see on the inside of him. But Yosa had told him that the water stone represented that the Maker wanted to make him clean. How was that possible? There was one sacred piece and one symbol left. There was one great question left. Would that answer the now burning question inside Ko? What's the last one, the great question that goes with the firestone? Ko asked, raising his head to look Yosa in the face again. How can I be made clean? That's what I want to know, Ko said quickly. Well, that is the last question. How can I be made clean? You have to know that in order to live your purpose, the purpose we talked about. To be a son of the Maker, I have to be made clean. Is that what the question is asking? Yes. Yosa said no more. Then how? Ko demanded. And what did it have to do with the firestone? Nothing was making sense. He was almost angry now. Why was Yosa sitting on the answer he most wanted to hear? We don't know. Who doesn't know? What's the answer to the question? That is the answer. We don't know. We must ask the Maker. Ko stared in disbelief for a long moment at Yosa. The whole thing was a farce. The great mysteries came out without any answer? In an instant, that little voice inside of Ko reminded him, It's not that there's no answer. The answer is that we have to ask the Maker. The answer to the last question is that the Maker wants to make me clean, so he must have the answer. Though what that answer could possibly have to do with the firestone and the bird ceremony performed on it, Ko could not begin to imagine. We must ask the Maker. Yosa's words echoed back at him inside his head. But this was no help at all. An invisible Maker who made all the beauty around Ko and wanted sons and daughters, and so had made all people, a Maker Ko had never heard of until this conversation with Yosa. How was he supposed to ask this Maker anything? He turned to Yosa to ask him the question lingering in his mind, but Yosa had closed his eyes, facing up to the sun. Ko hesitated how to frame his question. How could he ask the Maker? Well, Dove, you need time. After learning the great questions and their answers comes a time to think on them for yourself. I must be leaving you. For now, I'll see you again. And before Ko could ask Yosa to wait or come back, Yosa's back was disappearing into the tall, thin trees of the mountain forest. Ko thought about calling after him, but instead he sat silently and looked out at the mountains, and the valley, and the river, and the forests below. If the Maker's seat was everywhere around him, couldn't he just ask him what he wanted to know? If he'd made Ko and everything else, couldn't he speak Ko's language? Wouldn't he hear Ko if Ko just asked him? Ko whispered just one word. How? Surely the maker would know what he meant.